Thank you very much, Adrian, and thank you for inviting me to speak at the conference. Delighted to be here. Have you got the clicker for changing the slides? Just down here. Right. So my talk today is a much abbreviated version of the same talk which I am doing as part of the 2016 CIM Distinguished Lecturer Program. So the first thing I want to do is acknowledge the sponsors of that program who are supporting this lecture. And just now really I'm going to say what the 40% mind means and why we need a journey to it. Essentially, the work, which is a research project, involves trying to identify a portfolio of technologies that we could deploy in combination to bring about a transformation in the energy consumed by mines. And it's a big aspiration, I know, but the objective is by 2040 we might be able to see the sector as a whole be able to reduce energy consumption to 40% of current levels. So it's a target, an aspiration, a vision. And the motivation is quite straightforward as well. It's all about trying to lower the operating costs for mining operations. The focus is Canada. When I have articulated this vision to those who I've met in recent years, they've actually looked at me and given me a bit of a skeptical eye. They haven't been quite convinced that such a feat is possible. So what the talk is the journey, how one could actually bring about that transformation. I'm going to do that with reference to two case studies. Before I get onto that, I have to acknowledge some of the members of the team with whom I work in Sudbury at Morocco, and I'll be drawing on some of the results that they've done through my talk. In identifying technologies for the portfolio, the 40% mine portfolio, I have confined myself to considering technologies that are either at level 8 or level 9 of the technology readiness level scale. And if I get a chance to make a preference, to choose level 9, which for me means that there has been testing and a successful deployment in an operational setting, where that operational setting is an operating mine. The general strategy for the 40% mine will be familiar to anyone involved in energy management. First thing is to reduce the wasted energy, then use what energy that you have to use more efficiently, and then finally look at technologies that could lower the energy consumption further. I've broken those down into two: renewable energy technologies and also renewed technologies, because our predecessors sometimes had some fantastic ideas which we've forgotten about, and I'm trying to encourage people to remember them and bring these back. So we're going into the first case study. This is a base metal mine, and I come from Sudbury, so it's an underground mine. This is the energy flow diagram, or the Sankey diagram, showing how much energy goes into this mining operation in terms of the thickness of these ribbons, and also what form the energy goes in. So green is for natural gas, red is electricity, and blue is diesel. We've got a little bit of ammonium nitrate, so the explosives. We also show where that energy goes to and what part of the operation the energy is consumed in. And then over on the right-hand side, in the sort of brown-grey, those are the corresponding amounts of energy emissions. And what you can see is that for this particular operation, which is an underground mine, they're consuming up to 72% of their energy is used for the ventilation system in one way or another. So that's the obvious place to target efforts to bring the target down to 40% of what it is at present. In this table, I'm really just showing you the same information as in the energy flow diagram, but I'm presenting it in tabular form with the energy consumption in this column here in the middle, the corresponding cost using the cost values for for the different forms of energy, and also using the emissions factors, taking account of energy mixes and that sort of thing as well. And so our objective is to make this number here at the bottom, which is currently reading 100%, we want to make it less than 40. So the first thing we'd recommend is looking at the auxiliary ventilation systems. We have analysed a fair few of these now, and the recommendation is to use slippery, that is low friction, well installed, that is not very leaky, auxiliary vent ducts, and to couple those with variable speed fans. So I'm sorry, my pointer has given up the ghost now. These we classify as TRL9. And we have found when we do the analysis that just about every time we do an analysis, we can find a set of parameters that will mean that the energy consumed will be just 30% of what it would be if it was business as usual. Unfortunately, each case is different, so you have to analyze each vent duct stream on a case-by-case basis. So we've developed a tool that is freely downloadable that we hope people will use to do precisely that and benefit from the savings. And so when we apply that 70% figure to the auxiliary ventilation system, we see we transform a 17.8% consumption into a 5.3% consumption, and down at the bottom, we haven't got to a 40% mine yet, but we've got to an 87.5% mine. Still pretty good, but it just shows you how much energy is used in ventilation in mines. The second measure we'd suggest is to use a technology which has been in operation in Sudbury for decades, and it's a winter air heating system that uses warm water from pumped mine dewater that's pumped from the bottom of the mine. It's sprayed into a chamber, and then you bring cold winter air, minus 20 or so, into the same chamber, and the warm water heats up the cold air, and at the same time the water gets colder, and so cold it turns into snow. So you need some sort of void to allow that snow to fall to get the heating effect, to sustain the heating effect. And that means that this mine doesn't use natural gas at all to do any winter heating of the air that goes into the mine. And so you can eliminate natural gas consumption entirely from the energy mix for this mine. So just showing that there at the top. So we've got rid of natural gas, if you like. We're down to a 70% mine at the moment, so we keep moving on. Next thing to say is electrification. The next measure is that we'd recommend is electrification of mine vehicles, production vehicles principally. And there are even now exemplars of battery electric production vehicles that are used in mines. It's the sort of thing that we have in mind here. But I think I'd still classify them as TRL8 rather than TRL9 because their rating maybe isn't quite as big as we'd want for ubiquitous use throughout the industry. But by 2040, I'm absolutely certain that that technology will be available if it's not available in a couple of years. The cost of these is obviously a bit more than the cost of the equivalent diesel equipment, but not a huge disparity. So when we consider a battery electric vehicle and electrification, the first benefit is to remove a substantial amount of diesel usage from the subsurface. So I'm showing 100% removal for underground mining equipment there. But although the electric drivetrains are more efficient than the diesel engine drivetrains, you still are going to just push some increased consumption on electricity. And so I've just added a flat 3.9% to the previous value of 1.6% for that usage of underground electricity for static equipment. So, but having made a switch to electric vehicles, you can then look at the ventilation system, the main fans. And I've got two equations in my talk here. This is the first one, and it articulates the idea that if you double the flow rate, the corresponding cost of electricity is going to increase by a factor 8. And putting that relationship backwards to see what happens when we lower the flow rate. In this case, if I reduce the airflow to 73% of what it was before, the corresponding electricity consumption would drop to 39% of what it was before. When I do that and put that value into my table, it's a 61% energy saving. I've hit my target of 40%. And my figure at the bottom there, 39.9. So it's with these 4 measures, I've reached a 40% mine target. Before we leave this particular case study, just want to highlight that these areas of consumption which have thin bands are very interesting to mine energy managers because they save something even better than energy. They save energy cost, potentially, because those could be high-rating pieces of equipment operating intermittently, the clearest example of which is a hoist. So if there's a time of use element to your tariff, or there's demand charging in your tariff, by trying to schedule the operation of those pieces of equipment, you can save energy cost, not necessarily save energy. Moving on to another case study, this is Nickel Rim South Mine, also in Sudbury, or this one is in Sudbury. This is a tougher mine to turn into a 40% mine through this sort of strategic, high-level thinking, because already it's had a lot of energy-saving technology deployed within it. So it's a much higher starting point. And you can see that immediately because ventilation is only 33% of energy consumed at the mine, much lower than the former case. And that's because they're using VOD already. So this is a bit of a tougher case, but we could still turn down the ventilation system by adopting an electric production, a battery electric production fleet. So that's what's implied in this first, or the impact of this first measure. So we've changed the use of diesel in the subsurface for electricity, and we've turned down the ventilation system. There are other things that we could do other than go for electric equipment to get the ventilation base load down, and it's best exemplified by looking at a deep mine, Creighton mine. This is a very simplified schematic of how the ventilation system works and consumes energy at Creighton mine. The fans amount to about 10.5 megawatts of power. About 7 megawatts of power of that is used just to move the air down to the production areas where we actually just want the air. It's astonishing. And so we could choose not to return all of the air to the subsurface, to the surface after we use the air. We could scrub it at depth and clean it and possibly even cool it at depth and lead to substantial reduction in the fan load. So this is a recirculation system. It's been well known about for decades, but it requires a bit of an upgrade of thinking and legislation in order to become a reality. But it is technically very feasible, especially if you're going to remove diesel engines from the subsurface. Another technology I'm very keen on is this one. It's called a hydraulic air compressor. It's a 100-year-old technology, very definitely TRL 9. Water comes in at the left-hand side at the top. It mixes with air in a mixing head and passes down that vertical shaft on the left, and as the water descends and pressurizes, so that pressure is transmitted to the air bubbles that have been mixed with it, and we get compressed air that separates out in that long horizontal gallery at the bottom. It's a very reliable installation. It served the needs of about 29 silver mines in the town of Cobalt in Ontario. And it's a way of producing very low-cost, renewable compressed air. That technology, in combination with the latest and greatest in energy-efficient crushers brought into the subsurface, and energy-efficient grinding units brought into the subsurface, would allow us to perhaps entertain a bubble lift to take just the valuable mineral up the shaft rather than having to take all of the ore up the shaft. So being able to produce compressed air, which to date for this technology for this proposal has been a bit of a showstopper. You know, the cheaper compressed air allows you to at least entertain it. And with those measures, we'd move hoisting load and compressed air load over into a renewables column on this table. And so there'd be some reduction in carbon emissions associated with that. Creighton Mine, again, is an example of an air heating system which involves bringing all the mine ventilation air through a big pile of broken rock before it enters the intake to the downcast shaft. So if you like, we're putting a big mound of rubble over the intake collar. And the reason we do this is, in Canada anyway, is because the warm summer air passes through that rock and leaves its heat in the rock fragments, so that when the winter, very cold winter air comes along, that heat is given up and warms up the winter air and prevents icing in the shaft as the air goes into the intake system. And this completely offsets any natural gas usage. Other mines have big piles of rock as well. We call them waste tips. So there's, take some imagination about re-engineering those waste tips to put them to some associated use for this idea to be applied to other mines. But in this case, it'd certainly be applied at Nickel Rim South, and that would push heating ventilation air with natural gas into a renewable column using that seasonal thermal regenerator technology, which has been in operation at Creighton Mine for decades again. To go further, we need to turn to renewables, and I was very pleased to see Caterpillar talking about thin film PV yesterday. We've been working with thin film PV for a few years. This is our prototype that we tested in Sudbury a few years ago. It's thin film PV encapsulated in a polymer so that the panels float. Importantly, the panels are in direct contact with the water, so that the water cools the panels and increases the efficiency of conversion by keeping the panels cool while they're operating. The way we see this being used, it could be illustrated by this graphic of Victor Mine in the far north of Ontario. So the tailings pond is up at the top of the picture there towards the left. And what we envisage is just covering that tailings pond entirely with floating PV system, offering additional benefits of a barrier to wildlife, possibly also retaining water if this was an idea deployed in a hot country, or stopping evaporation, and maybe even stopping dust if it dried out entirely. So with photovoltaics, you could use those to meet dispatchable electrical loads, such as dewatering pumps, and we're moving more of our load then over into the renewable energy column. Fantastic presentation from Liesl van Wyk yesterday, showing us that wind energy in mines is a wonderful idea. In fact, Nickel Rim South exists in the same wind belt across Canada as Diavik. So there's no reason why we couldn't entertain some sort of wind farm attached to this operation in Sudbury. And if we did that, we'd be able to use the power from that wind farm for batch process in the event that there's no storage on the site. For example, using it for the backfill production. Or if we've gone to electric production equipment in the subsurface, we'll use the wind energy to charge up the batteries, so because we do have storage on site. And you'll see that that takes us down to 37% of what we started with. So again, with those measures, we've realized this idea of a 40% mine in energy terms with corresponding benefits of carbon emissions and cost reductions. I'm not going to talk about this diagram so much. It just represents the fact that we consider lots of different technologies as potentially selectable when we think about individual mines and the best way of delivering energy for them as a kind of optimization solution. And it essentially involves considering all the different forms of energy a mine might use, all the different types of technology are available, and finding that which delivers the minimum discounted cost of energy supplied to the mine. So my conclusion then is that 40% mine vision isn't actually that unrealistic. It needs some imagination, but it's not unrealistic. But clearly different mines are going to have different specific needs because their energy flow maps are going to be different. So, but the portfolio is sufficiently broad that we can think about putting the pieces of the puzzle together to try to bring this consumption figures down substantially. 40% is an aspiration, but it represents a number, a target big enough that I believe that as a sector as a whole we should be aiming at, certainly by 2040. And I'm going to leave you with this last slide, which I think echoes a sentiment that, again, Liesl van Wyk articulated yesterday, that there's a perfect synergy between energy efficiency, renewable energy, and mining developments, which I hope, being attendees at this conference, you at least strikes a chord with you. So thank you very much.